What you're about to experience is one man's quest to see beyond the tumultuous period we're in and to envision what lies just beyond our grasp, yet well within our reach. Welcome to Larry Rifkin's America Trends, where the future has arrived, and it's just in time.
Welcome back to America Trends. I'm Larry Rifkin along with John Kropsick, and we've got our head in the clouds, as we always do, looking just beyond the horizon.
Everything's in the clouds these days.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, we're so dependent upon computers, John, and a lot of people think that computers and all the entertainment and all of the information that they bring us brings with it more happiness. But do you agree with that?
No, in fact, I'm trying to wean myself off and do less of it because I find myself paying more attention to the computer and to the email. And I don't even do social media. I don't even know how I would do that. But, you know, just the little bit I do is just, it's consuming.
Well, I read today where about 42% of people are taking some time off from one point of their year to another, saying, that's it. I'm not going on Facebook or Twitter. I'm done for a while. So people do take these pauses and rests.
Well, I want to try when the kids come over to the house, have them turn off their phones. And because a lot of times, you know, we'll be sitting there eating and something and they're on their phone. They're communicating with somebody else. Well,
you know what you should do, John, because you're very clever. Why don't you build a little tech basket? And so when everybody comes to the door, you know, your phone goes there. It's almost like the old days with the saloon, and all the guns have to go over there. If you're going to drink here, you don't have a gun on you, boy. So anyway, think about that.
You're right. That's a good idea.
But, you know, our next guest is going to be talking about the fact that, in fact, your happiness was hacked. That's the name of a new book, Why Tech is Winning the Battle to Control Your Brain and How to Fight Back. And it is a serious thing. I mean, there are times when it's just, oh, come on, honey, can't we just talk like we used to? Why is it that you have to have an experience out of body?
I need some more dopamine.
I know. I want a like. I need another like. And then I can go to bed feeling
I can win this on eBay. I can win it.
Yeah, exactly. And believe me, it is a distraction. My wife and I love to spend time now kind of like older people, which we have somehow morphed into, where you sit on the porch and you
don't have to worry.
And you talk.
There's a lot more older, so don't worry.
I know.
Okay.
We keep developing all these new old people, and they look older than I do. And I'm saying, where does this new crop keep coming from?
We went to bingo the other day, and I was happy because I'm like, wow, I'm like the youngest guy there.
No matter whether I am or I'm not, I always think of myself as being the youngest guy in the crowd. And, well, I'll have to sit on a couch to explore that. But we are not on a couch today. We are standing up, and we have our phones near us, John, but they are not going to consume us. And we're going to be doing a lot of recording today, old-fashioned on an analog. Well, no, it's a digital system. I shouldn't say that.
You know, you want me to go back and get the tape machine?
Yeah, let's roll it. Roll it. And then the razor blades come out, and we edit and cut and splice. But your happiness was hacked. Now, you know, the worst element to all of this, I mean, there are many ways where we might laugh about it or think, oh, it's a nice little distraction. But in the case of the gentleman who's going to be joining us, a co-author of this book, he almost killed somebody. And we do talk about this in the course of our conversation. But literally, by being consumed by this little device, if he didn't look up, that split second saved him from really destroying their lives, these bicyclists, and his own life forever.
Right.
Only for what? For what, John?
For what? Just to find out who's bugging you now.
Yeah, that little ping. And that really is like a dog whistle. Whoa, I've got to respond to this.
Exactly.
So, John, this is a serious issue. It really is.
It is.
And I think a lot of families are recognizing that things are getting a bit out of control. And they're trying to figure out ways without being punitive, because they know that these devices are now a part of their children's lives and their lives. But how do we control it? How do we make it a part of our lives that's an extension of the good life that we've had in the past based on real experiences and relationships, and try to use it in a complementary way, but don't let it dominate your life. Yeah, so let's talk to our guest. He is the author of the book, Your Happiness Was Hacked: Why Tech is Winning the Battle to Control Your Brain. Well, the book is called Your Happiness Was Hacked: Why Tech is Winning the Battle to Control Your Brain and How to Fight Back. And a co-author, Alex Salkever, is with us here on the line. And Alex, a lot of people look at Americans and say we're a rather unhappy lot. And yet we can entertain ourselves to death today. Why are we so unhappy?
For a bunch of reasons. First of all, it really depends on who you are and where you are, what you're doing. Clearly there's some big signs of unhappiness growing, such as reduced life expectancy in America, which is very odd. We've seen lower life expectancy for the past 2 years. We're also seeing a 30% increase in suicides over the past 4 decades. And I think, or what we think, and we talk about in the book, a lot of what's at the core of this is technology has started to play more of a toxic role in our lives and has dehumanized us, made our relationships cheaper, and our important relationships more scarce, and also fragmented our attention to such a degree that we feel like we're, constantly ADD, constantly looking around, checking texts, looking at the phone, and we're almost never just in the moment or doing things when we're not connected to a device.
And, of course, you and your co-author, Vivek Wadhwa, you love technology. You admit to using it. And, in fact, the admission that you make early in the book about almost taking the lives of individuals while you were distracted, why don't you remind us of that and remind us of your relationship to technology?
I'll start with my relationship with technology. I started as a very early user of computers when I was young. I did a little bit of programming. I also wrote all of my papers very early. I was an early adopter of broadband internet. I used it as a freelance journalist earlier in my career, and was really hooked. And it was incredibly important for me. It helped me earn a good living. It helped me learn about the world. It was an incredible productivity tool. And then somewhere maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago, it started to flip. And I started realizing that I wasn't the one that was using the tool. The technology was actually almost pulling my strings and getting me to do things that the people who built the technology wanted me to do. In some cases, that was not only unhealthy, but really dangerous. And the example you're talking about, which we cite in the book, I was driving on a very windy stretch of highway.
I love that stretch of highway, by the way. Beautiful.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah. This is for people that know California. It's Highway 1 north of San Francisco. Some of the best views you'll see in America. It's an amazing stretch of highway to drive, and there was a big discussion going on among the executive teams at a tech company I was working at. So for the last 10, 15 years, I've been a technology executive, primarily in marketing and products. And there was a big discussion on text. Because of the environment at the company, people always felt like they had to be in discussions. They were afraid to miss out on things. So I was reading and answering texts on this super windy and dangerous stretch of highway. I almost ran a pack of cyclists off the highway, probably to their deaths off a cliff, and I might have driven off myself. But for the grace of God, I hadn't looked up at the last minute and seen, oh my God, I'm going to hit these people. If I look back on it, I can't even remember what the contents of the texts were.
Of course, and we've all done this, believe me. You're not the only one with sin on your hands, but we still do it at times. I'll admit, even driving here today, I was checking a text, and I said, stop, particularly knowing I was going to talk to you today.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's on the one hand, some of it is our fault, right? We're humans, we're responsible, we're the masters of our fate. On the other hand, these products have been designed to be so incredibly addictive, to push all of our evolutionary buttons, and to make it so easy for us to feel that we have to do things which in fact are really unimportant and often downright stupid and dangerous. And that's because of the way the industry has really designed its engagement with users. The last thought has been safety. The last thought has been well-being. And we're seeing a little bit of a flip now with Google and Apple starting to make some changes that we hope will be helpful. But even now, it's pretty late in the game. For most people, you ask them, When's the last time you tried to go somewhere new and weren't using a GPS device on your phone, Google Maps or something like that? And all of them will say, I basically I can't find people anymore that can get by without GPS.
Oh, absolutely. Let me ask you, as it relates to addiction and our understanding of it, and the industry trying to pretend that, well, you may be addicted, but it's all for the good. You're learning more, you're entertained, you're finding relationships and so forth. Are they whistling past the graveyard, a lot of these technology providers, knowing, like the tobacco industry did well in advance of others, that this thing really was, a collision in terms of your better sensibilities over time?
I think some of them are. Certain ones have probably known for quite a while that the amount of time people were spending with their applications and their services was unhealthy. Some of them actually tell you never to get out of the service. Some of the chat services like Slack, they warn you that if you don't have notifications turned on, then you won't be able to use the tool very well. Others, things like email, I think it's been obvious for quite a while that people overuse email, and a lot of Americans check email 200 times a day. Which is kind of crazy. So I think many of the tech companies have known this. I think it hasn't been that much of a priority because you don't make money, at least initially, by taking care of users. And it's also different than cigarettes in the sense that there really isn't the same kind of addiction that hurts other people directly, with secondhand smoke. I would say that it's a problem that's as bad, but it's more of a slower burning problem.
But when you think, well, it may not burn as well as tobacco, but when you think about it, in terms of what families say about their inability to communicate with one another and the way that they're alone together at the table and they're not communicating directly, and their kids are always in some other place, never where they are, thinking there's always a better deal or a better relationship somewhere else, it is harming a lot of behaviors in some material ways.
I honestly believe that is the truth. Now, what we tried to do in this book as well was really not just look at the surveys which talk about happiness, because those are really hard to pin down and very fungible. You can slice them and dice them many different ways, and also it's very hard to show a direct correlation between technology usage and happiness. So instead I looked for proxies, things like depression, which has consistently gone up in this country, things like suicide, which is, obviously if you're sad, you're going to probably, you have to be very sad to do something like that. Or little things like sleep deprivation, which we don't realize but has a profound impact on the way we experience life in the world. And not just sleep deprivation in terms of, really bad sleep deprivation like 5 hours, more like the difference between 6 and 7 hours consistently over the course of a week.
Let's back up over that, for example, because you talk about the fact that a lot of people do have their phones by their beds. They keep that light on, and we've heard lots of things about the impact of that light on our ability to really fall asleep, truly fall asleep, and, of course, what it does to our eyes. There's a lot of new research about that. So what happens, what should we do with our phone after a certain time? Just turn it off?
Absolutely, turn it off. Ideally, put it in a drawer somewhere. If you need folks to reach you, definitely put it in Do Not Disturb, or put it in Night Shift, which takes the blue light and replaces it with other colors of light. Design an environment so that you will not be disturbed with your phone, except for in circumstances where it's truly an emergency. Because that's really the only reason you should be waking up in the middle of the night and reading emails or checking texts. Anything else, it's just fooling yourself, because you may think you're working 24/7 or you're talking to teams, but you're robbing yourself of just being aware, awake, happier, and ultimately healthier over time.
Well, I've got to admit that I have my phone near me, but I do take the light off, and I'm listening to perhaps Sirius XM, and I'm out here on the East Coast, but I'm a San Francisco Giant fan. So sometimes I'm listening to the play-by-play, and then I want to get up and see what happened, whether they won or not.
So that's a really interesting example, because I'm actually not opposed to people listening to phones when they go to sleep. That's not a really bad way to engage with it. as long as there's sort of, a podcast or sports or something like that.
Well, America Trends, we're always listening to that. Yes.
Right.
No,
and there's a long history of people falling asleep while listening to stories. I mean, that's not a new or different or bad behavior. And it sounds like you've engineered that to a certain degree where, you're comfortable listening while you're sort of dropping off to sleep and you're listening to whatever sports it is. But where the problem occurs is when you get up and go and look at a screen or go check when you pick up your phone because you want to see a highlight footage, and that engages different parts of your brain in different ways of being
that's a great point.
That will wake you up for a long time after that. So we talk about that quite a bit in the book as well, how important it is for all of us to design our environments and design the rules of engagement with technology to try to make it something that is healthier.
Let's talk about some of the key areas of our lives that you say are definitely impacted by this technology. Love. Now, there are a lot of people, and I have a friend who is twice divorced, and now he's very active on Plenty of Fish, POF. He's older, a lot of women on the site, and of course, I've been happily married, thankfully, for over 40 years, and he just tells me these stories, and I'm like, I can't believe it. But with Tinder, OkCupid, a lot of these sites, Match.com, I mean, why is that perhaps not the best way to look for love in all the wrong places, or is it?
Well, so first of all, I don't want to say that online dating by itself is a horrible thing because it has a lot of really strong benefits. I mean, if you're in a small town, for example, now because you have online dating, it is easier to find people in other parts of the world. For people that maybe have very specific needs, that may make sense. Where I feel like this has gone really badly wrong is precisely with things like Tinder, where you're just flipping back and forth across images of people, and you're casting these judgments, which are very serious judgments, based entirely on a first-hand impression. And that's actually a terrible way to decide whether you're going to marry somebody. Now, don't get me wrong. You don't decide if you're going to marry someone because you like them on Tinder and you have to go meet them and talk to them, all of that kind of stuff. But it also has the perverse effect of ruling out all the other people, probably most people, that you might think are really interesting or funny. The human way of viewing others tends to be very complex. So, for example, you may meet someone and think, oh, they're not very beautiful, or, he's not that handsome, but it turns out that the person's really funny, or they're really empathetic, or they're really smart. And that changes the way you view them. So this way of doing it with Tinder makes it very transactional, very focused on image, and very kind of shallow.
Yeah, superficial. The one that really hit me, and I took a snapshot of it, sent it to my daughter, was the page where you describe Netflix. And many of us know what they're trying to do in terms of getting us to stay and really make us captive to their content. But the way they figured out these algorithms and what it is that moves us and the way the next episode's coming and you can't leave. I mean, tell us what they're doing to us.
So it's a really smart way of using behavioral design and behavioral science to encourage more consumption. So when you talk to the guy that's the godfather of a lot of this is someone named B.J. Fogg, who's a researcher at Stanford, who's actually done some really good work on how to use technology, for example, for positive medical interventions with smartphones. For example, checking blood pressure or different types of screening effects. At the same time, what he figured out is, which is both good for useful things and good for destructive things, is that the easiest way to drive a behavior or change a behavior is not to encourage people, but it's to reduce the barriers towards the behavior you want them to pursue. So what Netflix figured out is that it noticed a small subset of people were binge watching, were watching one episode after another, and it thought, the science team there thought, I wonder if we make that the default behavior in the app, that would encourage more people to watch more and make it stickier. And so what they did is they reduced the barrier to such a degree that now you really don't. Not only do you not have to do anything, but you have to actively work harder to make it stop than for it to happen when it autoplays the next episode. They don't have to do that. Now, granted, we can go in and change that, but you have to go in by default. And change the default settings on your Netflix, which is somewhat painful, and that's the barrier, right? So they flip the barrier, and that's what drives a lot of these behaviors. That's why you see things like on Twitter, for example, when you first sign up for Twitter, they realized that you needed something in your feed, so they encourage you to go out and follow 10 people. And they do it at the very early part of the application installation process.
They know so much about us and our behaviors, and yet we easily reveal that by our actions. And you say, though, it's interesting that they, in many ways, because of news filters and the like, as much as we think we're expanding our choices and a lot of the information we get, in many ways we are self-defining and limiting our behaviors and our information because of who they think we are and perhaps who we have told them we are.
Very much so. So if you think back, probably I would bet 10, 20 years ago, it was a little harder for you to access all the different information sources. And you would think that, with the Internet, I can now read everything across the spectrum, do more and more research. But the reality, too, is that, yes, you could do that, but because of the way the recommendation algorithms work, and frankly, the people around you most likely behave, you're actually seeing a more constrained view of the world than you did before. It really wipes out this diversity that we used to have, that we'd be exposed to through our personal networks, and because so much of what we consume now is driven by algorithms that the big social media or the big technology companies develop, as opposed to other means of filtering, that we really have a lot less choice, or even less understanding that we don't have choice than we probably ever did in the past.
The book is called Your Happiness Was Hacked, Why Tech is Winning the Battle to Control Your Brain and How to Fight Back. You tell us that, of course, it has affected our work environment. A lot of people think, well, I'm much more productive now because of all this technology. But you say that deep work is being hindered in this process, and maybe we're thinking that we're getting more done, but we're really not.
That's my belief. Now, others may disagree with it. When I say deep work, I won't take credit for that. That's another gentleman named Cal Newport, who wrote a book actually called Deep Work, first started talking about this. And people have been talking about what deep work is for quite a while. By that, I define a state when you're maybe spending an hour, 2, 3 hours really engrossed in thought, working on a detailed project, something that requires all your attention, with no interruptions, no switching from task to task, not checking your emails, not flipping around. That happens to be the state that's most conducive to creating really valuable, unique things. So artists, for example, are in that state. Athletes when they train. And frankly, inside of knowledge working companies, best state for doing things like computer code or writing white papers or thinking through deep strategy. Unfortunately, the technology around us really discourages us entering that state.
So the rest of us who are mid-managers or we're, this, that, or the other, and we don't really, plan to rewrite somebody's code or whatever, and we can be easily distracted. And that internet sitting there with all the possibilities and all the ways we can entertain ourselves, is that taking away from the work environment in many cases?
So I believe so. I believe that it is in multiple ways. One way is meetings. Technology has made it much, much easier to schedule meetings, and we actually have seen an effective increase in the number of meetings happening at companies where you're able to track this. Technology has made it easier to hold meetings because now you just send everyone a calendar invite. And in particular, if you're a VP or a director or something like that, everyone pretty much has to fall in line. So you lose control of your schedule, and because it's so frictionless and easy, you just send out these invites, and that really breaks up people's days to a much greater degree than they realize. You also have interruptions from email, which we know, but also more and more from chat, meaning applications where it's more like a text app, but something like Slack or other things like that. And all of those three combined, you start to see how splintered our days become. I mean, another facet is that now we have more and more technology tools that we use. So a lot of companies, they're using not only chat, email, word processing, but also maybe a couple of places where documents are stored, maybe a software tool for image processing. And all of these things collectively add up to a massive cognitive load of us just storing in our brains, how do I deal with all these tools? And so we end up in kind of this revolving door of work where we think we're working, but we're actually not doing nearly as much as we could if we narrowed down our life and our focus.
When we look at the casino gambling industry, you suggest that there's a lot that has been picked up in terms of cues and visual imagery as it relates to technology that was learned from the casino operators. Explain that to us.
And so that section we pulled from some of the thinking of a very well-known gentleman named Tristan Harris, who was a design ethicist at Google. The thinking there is that in the casinos, the entire goal is to keep people on the floor as long as possible and to keep them losing money as long as possible. So that doesn't mean that you walk in and essentially you lose a giant hand and then you're done, because that doesn't foster long-term behavior of coming to casinos over and over again. So they learned and researched quite a bit about how to design games, how to design visual cues and audio cues, even the environment around people, comfortable chairs they sit in, to make it harder and harder to extricate themselves from the situation they're in. Now, again, granted, I mean, we're humans, we have agency, you know, we can direct our lives, but it made it just that much harder to sort of pull yourself out. And I'll give you a couple of easy examples here. So in the past, when you had a slot machine, you used to have, you know, a limited number of lines or of rows, and the basically one was if you had all of the characters on the same row turn up as to match, and that's when you would get a reward.
Right.
As slot machines went electronic and digital, they started letting people bet many, many more ways. So now you can not just bet across, but you can bet upwards, downwards. You can bet diagonally. You can bet that you will have a count. Say you'll get 10 of these characters on the screen. And so you can place lots of little bets and still lose money on the hand, but feel like you're winning because you maybe won one or two of them. They'll also do things like give you audio cues for when you almost win. So if, say, you bet on a diagonal of five plums and you get 4 of them, it may give you a little happy sound. And the reason they do that is because they understand very well that the human brain reacts almost as positively to winning, to almost winning, to that happy sound as it does to actually winning. And at the same time, when we have these non-wins, when we may win small parts of hands but actually lose most of the bet, we also react to that as a win as opposed to as a lose.
Well, it's fascinating. It really is how they have gotten into our heads and our minds and our lives. If there were one way or just a couple of ways that we can take this technology, because you acknowledge, you and your co-author, you're not going to stop using it, I'm not going to stop using it, no one is. But how can we make it just a little bit better and healthier? Because right now, there are lots of things that we can look at, as you suggest, whether it's our health, our well-being, our emotional sensibility, and it's being affected, and in many ways, harmfully, by the technology. What can we do to kind of become the master again?
It's a really personal question, and that's why what we first recommend people do is they start to get an understanding of which of the technologies they're using, which of the social networks, etc., they're comfortable with, make them happy, they're in control of, and which ones are not, because often we may not realize it. So, I mean, if you go to YouTube and you actually are looking up how to relight the pilot light on your water heater, and you look at that video and you leave, then you probably have a pretty healthy relationship with YouTube. If you go to YouTube and you end up looking at that video and then 7 other videos about skydiving and then cat videos, and then you look up 45 minutes later and realize, where did my day go? Then maybe that's something that you should consider. So, I mean, I think the first part of anything like this is an honest assessment of how you are interacting with these different technologies in whether it makes you feel good or bad. And another way to do this, which I actually have done, and it's kind of painful, take a time audit. You can do it one day while you're at work. You just sit there with a pen and paper, go through your work day, and maybe for an hour or two, every time you do something, make a note. Now, I don't mean like every time you write a word, but say you're in a document writing something and then you have to go to email and then you maybe go to chat or this or that, but try to write it all down. And it doesn't even matter if you don't write everything down. To illustrate to yourself how much more scattered you actually are than you realize, and also how much more time this takes than you realize. And that's kind of the first step. After that, it's important to start trying to re-engineer your life in ways that you control the technology as opposed to the technology controlling you. So as an example, I specifically tried not to send emails to employees after 6 p.m. because I didn't want to encourage them to send and receive emails after 6 p.m. And I also knew even if I said in the email, you don't have to reply until the morning, well, what's the message I'm really saying? Right. So I mean, think about your actions and how they will impact other parts of either other people, but also impact the behavior you're trying to incent. So, for example, you listen on your phone to the to the sports games, and then you get up and you might check a video highlight or something like that. If that's the case, you may want to actually get a radio. If you can. Well,
we love radio, and I've been in radio over the years, but I can't get these games on a normal radio, so I get them on the phone. But regardless, I think you've given us a lot of information here and a lot to think about. What a wonderful book. And read a book. Your Happiness Was Hacked.
Absolutely read a book.
Alex Salkever and Vivek Wadhwa, and it is really a remarkable reminder of the fact that these are tools that we cannot live without, but we can live with them in a better, more healthy way if we work at it. And I thank you so much for being part of America Trends today, because indeed, this is one of the trends in our society. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.